Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today is a very special episode of Splat from the Past because I will be welcoming a multi-talented director of many 80s cult classics, Philippe Mora. You may know the name. He directed the horror cult classics The Beast Within, Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, Howling 3, and he directed several other genre films like A Breed Apart, The Return of Captain Invincible, Death of a Soldier, and he directed a horror film with Christopher Walken called Communion, and many others. And I can't wait to have him on today. I'm just a very big fan of his films. He's really good at casting people. He always casts like the best people for the movies. And he's a very talented guy. And it's going to be such an honor to interview him today. So, here is my interview with Philippe Mora. So how are you today, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am spectacular, and it's such an honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
My pleasure. I like to pontificate, Tommy.
Good, because I like to ask questions. So, going back in time, did you fall in love with film early on?
Definitely, because my family lived in the city in Melbourne, Australia, on a street called Collins Street, and there were a lot of cinemas on that street. And in fact, I would go. I mean, I saw every movie that came out from the age of about 10, really.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first movie you ever saw?
Look, I remember my mother taking me to a film festival, and I remember seeing Jean Cocteau's Blood of a Poet. And I remember that because of the scene of the guy crawling on the ceiling freaked me out. Mm-hmm. And then the film after that I remember was my father took me to see The Mole People, and that scared me too. In fact, he had to take me out of the theater. I was yelling so much. So I think my early cinema experiences were scary movies, and one surreal movie, the Jean Cocteau movie. And then after that, I was into everything: Tarzan, Ben-Hur, all the Hollywood movies that were coming out, and I was infatuated with movies. Actually, I started noticing mistakes that really got me involved in the movies. I remember in The Greatest Story Ever Told, mm-hmm. when there's the Sermon on the Mount in 70 millimeter, I noticed an extra looking at his watch, and that kind of blew. I had an epiphany. That's when I realized this was all created. Man, then I got into I started looking at continuity errors in movies. And I still do. I still find it hard to watch a movie without looking at continuity errors. It's kind of a twisted way to look at them.
Yeah, I've noticed continuity errors in many films most of my life.
Yeah.
What would you say are your favorite movies of all time?
That's a moving target. It's a moving target because I think we all change, and some movies become more significant than others. My tastes are broad. I mean, I was making a list of favorite movies the other day, and it included things like Skidoo by Otto Preminger and Mondo Carne, and then the classics, of course. I mean, you have to have a Kubrick, you have to have a Hitchcock. Those movies are a Buñuel movie. The Le Chien Andalou, the Dali Buñuel movie, I think is amazing. The Nutty Professor, brilliant.
Oh, love that movie.
Me too. So I mean, it's just like my tastes are Catholic with a small c.
Yeah, mine are eclectic too. I like everything, every genre. There's no genre I don't like.
Well, good. I agree with that. I mean, is there, really, depending on your point of view, is there such a thing as a bad movie? I don't think so. I think each movie reflects a particular time. They're kind of history. They're living history. I mean, Doctor, whatever that was, crazy title was Vincent Price, Doctor something and the Bikini Machine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a great connoisseur of crap.
Me too.
Yeah, as well as the more classic movies,
Yeah.
I like. One of my favorite movies still is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
It's an interesting one because of how Ford used the different POV. I mean, my feeling is that all the great works and the great movies, in some way, one of the themes in the movie, aside from the story they're telling, one of the themes is movies themselves. And by that I mean, like the example in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is, in many ways a traditional Western. In other ways, it's very avant-garde, showing the point of view of what actually happened towards the end of the movie, revealing the whole story and turning it upside down. That's a movie that's about filmmaking just as much as it is about who shot Liberty Valance.
Mm-hmm. I also think, too, that movie making is a gift. And, like, when I see a really bad movie, I'm not disappointed because, they got to do what they wanted. They got to put the gift of making a movie on screen.
I think that's right. Look, it takes... The strange thing is, I don't know whether strange is the right word, but it's just as hard to make a really bad movie as it is to make a really good movie.
Yeah.
So you may as well try and make a good one.
Yeah.
The effort is there. And I think that's what you're saying. Like, wow, they actually got to make that crap?
Yeah. I think everyone tries to make a good movie, but it doesn't always happen.
No. It's fascinating now. I mean, we're having this discussion about movies right in the middle of the sea change in film history with the advent of digital technology. I mean, that's changing everything, and most of all, it's changing the cost. Albeit you have these mega epics, Avengers and all this stuff, mega budget, but because of digital technology, a 12-year-old kid, he or she can go out and make a movie now. And that's incredible. And not only that, they can make the movie and they can put it on YouTube and have instant worldwide distribution. Mm-hmm. Well, let that sink in. I mean, that's just incredible, because when I was 12 making movies, I had an 8mm camera, and it was Kodachrome film, beautiful film, by the way, but I have to go to the drugstore or chemist and hand it in, and then they'd process it, and that would take a week or something, and then you'd have to project it. You have to have a projector, and you'd project. I mean, it was complicated, but now it's instant. Now you can make a movie and have distribution worldwide and send it to your friends the second after you've made it. That's a great freedom, and I think it's a great freedom of expression, and it makes me very nostalgic for all the old movies, the celluloid. I mean, I used to watch Real Changes with a great interest when I was a kid in movies. They'd have these scratched out things in the top right-hand corner at a Real Change, which was every 10 minutes. And I was fascinated by the process. Well, now, of course, we don't have Real Changes. And what I think is really funny, there's an application for I've got 1,000 applications, but for filmmaking, there's one called Hair in the Gate. Are you familiar with this?
Hair in the Gate? No.
There's a Hair in the Gate. You know what Hair in the Gate was when there was in the cinema and you'd see a hair would suddenly appear in the projector.
Oh, yeah.
Waving. Well, now there's a Hair in the Gate app, and you can put hair in your pictures. Fat hair, thin hair, pubic hair, blonde hair, black hair. It's just hysterically funny to me.
Yeah.
So things have changed.
Yes, they sure have.
Yeah.
So, after high school, did you come straight to the U.S. to try to make film?
Well, I had a 8mm camera. Then my father was very supportive. In fact, he wanted to be a filmmaker. And interestingly enough, when he was a student in Berlin in 1933, his landladies were Erich von Stroheim's sisters, and they used to show him postcards from Hollywood from their famous brother. So he was always intrigued with movies. Anyway, he gave me a 16mm camera as well. He bought me a 16mm camera, and I took that to London, and I started making what were then called underground films. I'm not quite sure why we called them underground films, but there was a worldwide culture, including the U.S., of course, of so-called underground movies. And so that's what I was doing. And my first professional involvement was really the documentary Swastika, which was produced by Sandy Lieberson and David Putnam. That was the first actual job. I couldn't believe it, that you could actually get paid for making movies. I mean, that blew my mind as well. Mm-hmm. Before that, I'd made a musical, which, for want of a better word, was a semi-underground too, Trouble in Melopolis. And my then roommate, Eric Clapton, produced it and gave me the money to make it when he, overnight, became a superstar with the Cream tour of the U.S.
Mm-hmm. You made shorts and documentaries before you did Mad Dog Morgan. Did you usually make documentaries that were about things that you were passionate about?
Look, well, the short answer is yes. The only thing I'd add to that is there's a lot of luck in how you get money to make a movie.
Right.
There's a lot of serendipity involved, and the serendipity involved in Swastika was that Sandy Lieberson and his then partner David Putnam had bought the rights to Inside the Third Reich by Albert Speer, which had been a bestseller, and they were trying to make a film out of that. I had a huge interest in fascism and the Nazis, and I still have an interest in it because there's so many unresolved issues. But because of my family history, many had died in Auschwitz. I was interested in the subject, so when I asked Sandy whether I could make a film of him making the film of Inside the Third Reich. And so, as I say, there's a lot of serendipity involved in that, and we got on very well, and he said, sure, do that. And as it turned out, Inside the Third Reich was never made at that time. It was made later for TV, but Sandy said, go ahead and make the film you want to make, which was, the original title was the clumsy title, A Nazification of Germany, and that turned into Swastika.
Mm-hmm. So after you did Mad Dog Morgan, there was a 6-year gap before The Beast Within. Were you having trouble trying to make a film during that time?
Look, I don't know how I've made as many films as I have, because it's always trouble. And it doesn't matter whether you've just had a hit or a flop or whatever. It's just the same effort. It's not like a restaurant which stays there at the same address. Each film you're starting a new business. But to answer your question, I actually changed countries. That's what the gap was. Mad Dog Morgan was in Australia. Mm-hmm. And then, interestingly enough, the country where the best reaction to my movie was the U.S. Kevin Thomas, the L.A. Times film critic, said that Mad Dog Morgan signals the beginning of a film renaissance in Australia. He loved the film, and he was right. It was the first. Mad Dog was the first Australian film to get a release here, and it did break the ice. And so I came to LA, and United Artists had seen the film, and they wanted to meet me because they couldn't understand how I'd made it for $400,000. And so I got quizzed on that, and then they said, well, we'd like you to make a film for us. And they gave me two scripts. One was The Beast Within, and the other was, I've forgotten the title, but it was a psychic horror story. And I preferred The Beast Within. I actually liked the title, to be honest. It's one of the big reasons. And and so my agent, this is will be amusing to some, my agent at the time, Robert Littman, who was a fantastic guy, he was actually an agent who did something, he said, Philippe, if you're going to work in Hollywood, whatever you do, don't read the scripts. Because if you read the scripts, you're never going to want to work here. So here's The Beast Within, and there's an offer. Just say yes. Just say yes, okay, please. So I got home, and of course the first thing I did was I started reading the script, and in the first page of this version, a woman gets raped by a giant grasshopper. And I thought no one's read this. It was incredible. With MGM on the cover, and a grasshopper rapes a woman, and I thought, I just, whatever. So I went to the meeting with Bobby Littman, and he positioned himself behind the head of the studio, Steve Bark, who was then embroiled in a lot of trouble with Heaven's Gate. And Bobby positioned himself behind Steve Bark so that he could make faces at me, to indicate how I should respond. And of course, the first thing Steve Bark says is, well, what do you think of the script? And I said, yes. And Bobby is waving at me. And Steve Bark says, no, what did you think of it? And what popped into my head, I knew it was a horror film, obviously. What popped into my head was steak tartare, raw meat. I just popped out of my mouth. What do I think of it? I think steak tartare. And the head of the studio looked at his assistant, Anthea Silbert, very nice lady, and he said, Anthea, steak tartare? And she said, Steve, Philippe's French. He's French. And Steve said, Philippe, you're the man for this movie. I swear to you, that's how I got the job. Saying steak tartare. So anyway, I went on to make the movie, and to use that cliche, the rest is history.
Tom Holland co-wrote the script. I met him at a convention. Very nice man. This was an MGM movie. This was at a time when the major studios were starting to make gory horror films after Friday the 13th hit. But didn't they make you cut a lot out for an R rating? Yeah, they did. It's interesting at that we had a producer who distrusted directors and writers. The late Harvey Bernard, who was a real old school producer, and he never wanted me and Tom to meet, which was a disaster, actually. So we never met until way after the film. And the studio brought in other writers to work on it, and it was a complicated situation, but it was crazy that I never met Tom till after the film was made. There are a lot of issues with the organization that was giving you ratings at the time. I think it was the MPAA. I think that's what it was called. And now, of course, you can show anything. I mean, I just can't believe what I'm seeing, even on TV, compared to what you could show then. Yeah. But it is amusing that one of the things we had a big fight over, and unfortunately they won, that was that when
head is pulled off in the climactic beast attack in the jail at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether you recall that, but the beast crashes through the wall, grabs his head and rips it off. And blood spurts.
Right.
Well, I had shot a close-up of his bow tie spinning through the air. I'm still laughing. So I shot the bow tie spinning through the air and landing in the toilet, which was in the cell. And there was a big close-up of it go plop in the toilet. Well, that was more problematical for the MPAA than any blood, any severed limb, I said, you can't have the shot of the bow tie in the toilet. And but bloodied. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Well, I don't understand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So you've got to take that out. And if you take that out, then you can keep the bad language in reel 5 or whatever it was, And so we negotiated over bad language. I lost, so I still miss that shot.
Yeah, it's too bad you didn't get to keep it and then put it on a Blu-ray years later.
Yeah, really. Well, they'd have it somewhere.
Oh, they do?
They'd have the dailies,
Yeah. One thing about your movies I always liked, and this was really the beginning of all that, is I really love how you always cast the best actors in your movies. You have a really good eye for talent.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think it's because if I have a talent, I think it's for casting, it's because I've seen so many movies, and I love those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the cast of The Beast Within I just basically cast everyone I'd ever seen in a Sam Peckinpah movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're all in there, apart from William Holden, unfortunately.
Yeah. You got Ronnie Cox, B.B. Besh, R.G. Armstrong, Meshack Taylor, who's no longer with us.
Luke Askew.
Yeah. That's
R.G. What a great! I keep seeing R.G. I'm a devotee of those black and white TV shows like Thriller and The Art of Limits and Twilight Zone, as I'm sure a lot of genre fans are. But boy, R.G. shows up a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in those TV black and white shows.
Yeah, he was a working character actor. That man.
Yeah, as does Don Gordon, by the way.
Yeah. Don Gordon was in a lot of stuff, too. He was in Westerns and stuff like that.
Yeah. It was a great training ground, those series. Great training ground for actors and directors and writers.
Yeah, people still are making those anthology shows.
They are or they're not?
They are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you followed that movie up with a superhero musical comedy called The Return of Captain Invincible.
Right.
How on earth did this movie come about?
Well, look, that was what I call my genre-busting movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good example of how it's a movie about movies as well.
Yeah.
That came about because there was again, I thought this was serendipitous. I went back to Australia, and there was a fantastic tax break for film financing in Australia at the time. Investors got an incredible 150% tax deduction if they invested in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically allowed films to be made. It was very brief, but it allowed films to be made that otherwise wouldn't have been made because they weren't formulaic, because the investors didn't care. They got 150%, so they didn't care what the film was. So the result of that was there was a lot of crap was made. But there were some really interesting films made out of it in Australia, and it was really the birth of the Australian so-called renaissance of filmmaking. But anyway, I was offered this script by, Bobby Littman, just say yes. And I read the script, and they had, and I'd wanted to make a musical.
Mm-hmm.
I'd wanted to, and I loved comic books. And I said to Bobby, look, I'll do this if I can turn it into a musical. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I think it'd be really funny and really interesting to have a Superman, basically a superhero movie. There weren't that many at the time, and make it a musical, and with each song being in a different pop style. So it was really experimental in that sense.
Yeah.
But because of the situation, they said, okay, go ahead. You know, I just made the Beast Within. And before I made Captain Invincible, by the way, no superhero had a problem. But since I made Captain Invincible, not only do they all have problems, the movies are about the problems. And that so many movies, let's call Captain Invincible an unsung breeder, because a lot of movies copied it. I mean, the first half of Hancock, almost shot for shot, is Captain Invincible.
Yeah.
And then the Disney animated movie, the unbelievable, what's it called, the family movie, the Incredibles. You know, the first one, he's in exile in black and white. And anyway, so it was. I think it was an influential movie. Not really. No one's really studied it. But as I say, superheroes didn't have a problem before Alan Arkin was an alcoholic in Captain Invincible.
Yeah. How did Alan Arkin get involved?
Well, he really liked it for an interesting reason. His father had been blacklisted. His father, as I recall, was a school teacher, and he'd been blacklisted in the McCarthy years. So what appealed to Alan was the idea of a blacklisted superhero. And it was as simple as that. He intellectually liked it. But my first choice was James Coburn, who I later made a movie with. He was a friend of mine, and Bobby Lippman was his agent. And I discussed the script with James and Philippe, and he said, look, Philippe, I really we'll do something together, but this isn't it, because there's a scene in here I just don't understand. Why did the vacuum cleaners attack Captain Invincible? And I said, well, look, it's a fantasy anyway, James, and it's funny, and the vacuum cleaners attack Captain Invincible because the bad guy, Christopher Lee, has rigged it like that. He said, I just don't get it. So anyway, cut to, I'm about to film the vacuum cleaner attack on the set with Alan Arkin a year later. And we're about to film, and Alan Arkin says to me, Philippe, look, there's one thing I don't get. Why are the vacuum cleaners attacking me? I said, Alan, it's too late, man. It's too late. We're doing it. Let's go. It's funny.
Yeah. It was also one of the earliest movies written by Steven DeSouza, who later went on to write all the Jules Silver blockbusters.
Yeah, well, Steve, and, I'm still friendly with him. And again, I didn't get to meet him too much until after the film was made, and he was puzzled, about the musical, because he hadn't written it as a musical. But anyway, we're good friends. But the funny thing is, he went on to do Die Hard.
Right.
And Die Hard, I wrote somewhere, I said that Steve went on to make the very movies that he was satirizing.
Yeah.
In Captain Invincible, which he was. And for some reason, he didn't take that well. He thought I was making fun of him. He said, why'd you say I went on to make the movies that I sent up? I said, well, you did. It was a funny conversation. And there's no hard feelings, by the way, whatsoever. But it was funny that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And then...
Die Hard would be a great comedy, actually.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I consider it an action comedy.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
It is very funny. Then you did the very interesting Breed Apart.
Right. Well, I have a soft spot for that movie, and it sounds like cliche, but I'm, very... I think climate change is the number one, is an existential threat. It's an issue, obviously. I don't need to go into it here, and I'm sure you all know it, or anyone listening has heard of it. In fact, it was a very hot day in LA, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a movie that really was about the environment and preservation of wildlife. And at the time, the bald eagle was under threat. So I just thought it was I thought the theme was great.
Right.
And the original cast was Ryan O'Neal was the star.
Oh.
And then, again, for some, this is where luck plays in. The Hemdale, the financiers, for some reason, they couldn't get it done with Ryan O'Neal shooting in New Zealand. I went down to New Zealand and found some incredible landscapes down there. I wanted to shoot it down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it was all switched around. We got Rutger Hauer and Kathleen Turner and Powers Booth, and we shot it in North Carolina. So, as I say, I've got a soft spot for that movie because of its theme. Morris Gibb from the Bee Gees did a kind of a lyrical score for an action movie.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed working with Rutger Hauer and went on to a few years later make another movie. And Powers Booth was tremendous.
Yeah.
And Kathleen Turner was really good. She'd just done Body Heat. There was a funny thing. I don't know whether Kathleen was dyslexic or slightly. I don't know. I shouldn't say that because I don't know. But
mm-hmm.
there's one line that was amusing that she couldn't say. She's supposed to look at Rutger and say, "You're very organized." And every time I did a take, she'd say, "Your organ's oversized." And to Kathleen, and it was really funny. But anyway, there you go.
Yeah. This movie used to be on HBO a lot in the late 80s. I remember as a kid seeing it a lot. And
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then the next movie, Howling 2, I remember that used to be on HBO a lot too. Like when it first hit HBO in like the spring of '87, it was on constantly. And it was the first one of the series I had seen. How did you get involved with Howling 2?
Well, John Daly, the producer of A Breed Apart, got the rights to Howling 2. And he said, "Philippe, will you do this for us?" And I needed a job, but I also loved horror movies. and then what really intrigued me was he said, "Philippe, I've got a deal to shoot this behind the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia, Soviet-occupied Prague." And I said, "Well, how do I make a movie in a Soviet-occupied country?" He says, "Well, I've got permission. We have a deal. It'll be based out of the studio there in Prague, and you'll have 4 interpreters." And so that, nothing to do with the script. I just say yes. Nothing to do with the script. But the idea of making a film behind the Iron Curtain really intrigued me. And that turned out to be an incredible adventure. And then icing on the cake was working with Christopher again, because we'd done Captain Invincible together.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, just a footnote on Captain Invincible, when Christopher Lee sings that fantastic song written by Hartley and O'Brien, the Drink song, he thinks, and it's in writing somewhere, he thinks that's one of the best things he ever did. He loved singing, Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, back to Prague. I didn't know that Christopher Lee had been a British Secret Service agent in World War II.
Oh.
And I didn't know that he was involved in the assassination, in the planning of Reinhard Heydrich, who was the head of the Gestapo and the only top Nazi who was actually assassinated by us in World War II. Anyway, when we landed in Prague, there was a military welcoming committee for Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. So all that was really intriguing. But the upshot was we were covered. Well, not only were we because we'd come from Hollywood, we were covered, spied on by KGB all the time. But because of Christopher's spying background, they were interested in everything, and bagged phone calls and so on and so forth. So the whole thing, there's a whole story in that. It's a movie I want to make at some point. I was a communist werewolf.
That's a good title.
Yeah.
And Sybil Danning, she was the queen of exploitation films at the time and stuff. How did she get cast?
Well, she got cast. John Davey, the producer, was a friend of hers, and he asked me whether I thought she would be good as queen of the werewolves, and I thought she'd be fantastic. You know, it's kind of perfect. And she was a really good sport, Sybil, because shooting, it was a pretty tough shoot. It was very cold, and there was kind of not a lot of infrastructure. Although we had a huge crew, because no one could speak English, that made it difficult too. But she knew Christopher. She'd worked with Christopher before. I'm not sure on what. I've forgotten now. But she knew Christopher, and so they got on very well. And then there you have it. I mean, there's I think that the scene where there's a threesome with Marsha Hunt, who was wonderful, by the way.
Yeah.
Marsha Hunt and Sybil, and I'm just embarrassed to say I've forgotten the name of the male actor.
Judd Omen?
And in the now infamous threesome, which is one film history wrote, is the only scene in film history that includes miscegenation, threesomes, bestiality, werewolf transformation, and lesbianism.
I wanted to ask, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but during the closing credits, we see 17 times a callback of Sybil revealing her breasts. How did that come about?
Look, I'm partially innocent, okay? But what happened was I went to Australia to set up a very serious movie, which is one of my best movies, actually, called Death of a Soldier, with James Coburn finally cast in one of my movies, and it's about a true court-martial of an American GI that after the war changed the court-martial, code of military justice in the United States. But anyway, I went down under to set that up. And I got a call from, I don't know whether it was the editor or my assistant here or whoever, but they said, John, he loves the shot of Sybil quickly showing her breasts in that sequence. I said, well, you know, it is great. She is great looking. There was nothing wrong with that. And he said, yeah, but he'd like to reprint it. I think he said 5 times, something like. He said, he'd like to reprint it about 5 times under the end credits. And I said, look, that sounds funny. Do it. That's really funny. Do it. Well, I didn't know that 5 turned into 17 until I saw the film, and with a with a completely shocked audience, including poor Sybil, who was completely shocked. And then it just became legendary over the years, and now we're all claiming credit.
Yeah. Who was that band that was playing on stage, and how did you find them?
It's a fictional band that never existed. It was created for the movie. Steve Parsons was sort of well known in London, just a very talented musician. But the band is a fictional band that we invented for the movie, and he was great. So they came. We flew them in from London, and there was there was a scene, the scene where Christopher Lee puts on the sunglasses, which I asked him to do because I thought he looked funny in them, like wearing sunglasses at night. He goes into a werewolf disco or nightclub, and so we got Steve to play live, and I asked the studio at the time, do you have punks here in Prague? This is 1984 in communist-occupied Prague. I said, do you have punks here? And he said, what's a punk? And I said, well, it's young people with tattoos and nose rings and half their head shaved off. And he said, oh, I don't know whether we have that here, but I'll find out. Anyway, the next day when we were shooting that scene, and about 1,000 punks showed up. They're all in the movie, in that scene. And while we were shooting, the assistant director came to me and said, look, there's a problem. The studio's been surrounded by police and armed Soviet soldiers, and there's a general outside who wants to talk to you. And I thought, Jesus, shit, what's happening here? So I went out, and there was this hardened general, Soviet general. He looked like he'd just come back from bombing Afghanistan. He was a terrifying-looking guy. And the translator said, the general wants to know, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're shooting a film about werewolves. The general wants to know, what is a werewolf? Well, a werewolf is a man who turns into a wolf when there's a full moon. And at that, the general just cracked up and started laughing, and I can't tell you how relieved I was. and then he said, the translator said, the general says, you've got 30 minutes to finish your scene, and then everyone has to leave here 3 at a time every 10 minutes. It is absolutely illegal for young people to be in a group like this in Prague at this time. So that's what we did. So we disbanded. When I got back to the hotel, 1,000 punks were outside the hotel, and in one of my great life moments, cheered me as I walked into the hotel. I was a hero.
Nice. I've always loved the poster. To me, it's one of the best posters of all time of any horror film, and I'm proud to say I own one.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, it's a fabulous poster. I've forgotten the name of the designer, but it really is good. And there is a little story behind why Sybil in that poster is wearing dark glasses. And you could call the story conjunctivitis. Because when we shot the scene of her in her castle, she came to me and she said, Philippe, I can't do the scene. I've picked up some infection in my eyes, conjunctivitis. I can't do the scene. And I said, well, of course you can't. Just wear sunglasses. And she said, well, it's nighttime. I said, well, come on. You're the queen of the werewolves. You can do whatever the hell you want. Wear sunglasses. It'll look good. And that's the poster.
Wow. Yeah, it's a really good one. When you did the third Howling, you went into a more comedic direction, and you did it, what was in Australia or New Zealand?
It was made in Australia, and I always was growing up in Australia. I was fascinated by the fact that all the animals in Australia were a different species of mammal. I think there's only 3 species of mammal. There's us, and there's monotremes, which is like the platypus, and then there's marsupials, where the embryo leaves the body before it's fully formed and goes into the pouch of the woman. And I was also fascinated by the fact that the marsupial predator, the Tasmanian tiger, that looked like a wolf, was extinct. So I always thought that was a great premise for a movie, and again, serendipitous. I had the rights to Howling 3, and I thought, well, let's just do a completely different thing and make it about marsupial werewolves. Let me just make a quick comment about sequels. Mm-hmm. If you're a director, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. People who love the original one don't like it if you stray from the original. and the critics say, "Oh, you've got no originality. You just copied the original." And then if you do stray, then all the fans of the original attack you. So whichever in terms of that, I just thought, the hell with it. I'm going to make different sequel. So ironically, the Howling franchise, which they went up to number 8, is the only franchise in movie history. I enjoy saying this, Tommy. The only franchise in movie history where each movie is completely different from the last one.
Yeah, I know. There's so much difference in each one of them. It's
But it's funny because it works. I mean, you wouldn't think it would. You'd think, because franchises usually have some kind of continuity. This has none whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, each one is different, and they're all pretty good, I think, for the most part. But this was the first one, and I think the only one that got a PG-13 rating.
Yeah, that's intriguing. I didn't actually set out to do a PG-13 rating, but then I thought it was actually good because a lot of kids could see the movie where a lot of kids could see it that wouldn't otherwise have been able to see it. And that turned out to be true, and it was a huge success on what was then video. I mean, I think they sold like $5 million worth the first day or something when it got on video. I think that's because of the rating. It's interesting though because I made another movie called Pterodactyl Woman from Beverly Hills, and that had Beverly D'Angelo gets pregnant in that movie, and she gives birth to an egg, which is to me harmless comedy. However, the ratings board people gave it an R because they said that's bestiality. I didn't know the birds were, but it was crazy, all this censorship stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really surprised that the marsupials got a PG-13 after that because it's interspecies sex in there with the marsupials and humans.
And is it true that Nicole Kidman auditioned for Howling 3?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And she was very good. And I just preferred Imogen. It was just a matter of, at the time, I thought Imogen looked more, wild, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Did you like the first Howling?
Look, this is going to sound really weird, but I don't mean weird, but odd fact. I hadn't actually seen it until after I made, until after I started making Howling 2.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing, the answer is yes. I thought it was well written. I like John Sayles.
Yeah.
I like Joe Dante's work, and but what I thought, what I liked, and what I did take from it as inspiration was the transformation of the anchor woman somewhere in there. She starts turning into a werewolf, I think, on camera. And I just thought I'd extrapolate on that idea and try and think up of all the crazy situations where someone could turn into a werewolf. That's why you have the scene I like best, one of the scenes I like best in Howling 3 is the ballerina turning into a werewolf during a ballet.
Yeah, because that's very interesting because I always felt that in Howling 2 you captured Joe Dante's essence in terms of visual, the first one.
Well, that is interesting that you to use the Australian or English word, you twigged on that because very definitely that was what I got from the original Howling. And at the end it becomes farcical, but I thought it'd be funny if a woman turned into a werewolf while she was receiving an Oscar.
And you did a movie with Christopher Walken called Communion.
Yes. No, that's a whole book in itself. No pun intended. But that's an incredible story, the book itself, and also the making of it, because well, first of all, let me take a step back. Whitley was an old friend of mine. I'd met him in London.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to the London School of Film Technique, and I went there as well for a day. I didn't particularly like it. But we met then, and years later, after I'd made quite a few films, and I saw Wolfen.
Yeah.
And it said written by Whitley Strieber, and I thought, I was thinking, I wonder if that's the same guy I knew in London. And I contacted the publisher, and they put me through to Whitley, and we had this great reunion in New York, and at a fancy restaurant. I remember the food, and then we were talking, and he did seem a bit disturbed to me, and I said, is everything all right? He said, well, I got to tell you something. These things are happening to me. This would be like 86, something like that. These things are happening to me that you're going to laugh at me if I tell you. I said, look, we're all friends. I'm not going to laugh at you. Just tell me. Maybe I can help. And then he said, well, I've been abducted by these little blue men, and they've been taking me into a place, and these other alien-type things have been, examining me. And I didn't laugh, although, by the way, it was hard not to. Little blue men abducting me.
Yeah.
But I didn't laugh, because it was obviously serious for him. And he said, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, I think you should see a psychiatrist, and I think you should get a publisher and write this. Both of which he did, by the way.
Yeah.
And because I was involved at the beginning, I said, we should make a movie. So he sent me the galleys of Communion, and we agreed to make a movie as partners. So I had the galleys, and I took the galleys around to studios here, and was laughed at. David Putnam, for example, who was a friend of mine, he said, Philippe, we can't do this. I don't believe it. And I thought, well, that's an unusual thing. Since when do heads of studios have to believe the story? That's a new one on me. Anyway, the book came out. It was a huge bestseller. And number one New York Times bestseller, incredibly, in the non-fiction list. It was a controversial decision on the part of the New York Times. And because it sold 1 million copies, I don't know how many, I think it did. It was a huge bestseller. Because of that, I was able to raise the money to make it as an independent film with Ed Simons from Allied in London. And then it was a very difficult film to make because I wanted to honor Whitley saying it was a true story, so I didn't want to mock it in any way. And so all through the making of it, I was, checking with Whitley on the authenticity of various things, including the infamous anal probe, which I had said to Whitley before we started. Are you sure you want me to put this in the movie? Because, I'm not trying to be funny, but this is going to follow you around. And he said, no, that's what happened. That's what happened. Anyway, I'm very happy with the film, but it was very difficult to make because it was supposedly a true story, which maybe it was. I don't know. But characterization of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I explained to Whitley at the time, which he accepted at the time, that Christopher Walken was an artist in his own right, and that this was not a documentary, even though it was based on a true story. It wasn't a documentary, and Christopher should be allowed to put his own artistic interpretation on the character, like he does on every movie he's ever made, and some very distinguished. So then we made the film. My phone was tapped. I was interviewed briefly on a plane by the Defense Intelligence Agency as to whether I'd met aliens. Whitley was interviewed by some intelligence organization, taken very seriously. Reagan was president at the time, and he had said that he'd seen UFOs when he was governor of California. So the whole UFO thing was blowing up. By the way, it seems to have blown up again. It doesn't go away, this UFO thing. You may have read in the papers recently, there's been sightings all over the place.
Yeah.
Many here in the U.S. So I don't know, the jury's still out. I mean, it's improbable that we are the only sentient human beings in the universe. In fact, it's not only improbable, if the universe is infinite, it's impossible that we're the only sentient human beings. Whether they're here or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I think that there's life on other planets, and they're just not coming to our planet and creating noise about it. But
yeah, I mean, it's illogical to think there is not life on in other solar systems. It's not logical. There's just so many solar systems, and the universe is infinite. There has to be life. But the issue is what kind of life, and when and if they get here in some way, what form is that going to be? I mean, they may be all over the place here. We just don't see them. It's a different form.
Mm-hmm. But you've kept working since, and you've seen many, many changes to the industry, like we were talking about earlier. A lot of today's filmmakers are having trouble getting their films distributed. Do you see another change or improvement in the future with distribution?
Well, look, that's a really interesting question for the following reason. Yes, it's difficult to get your films distributed. However, with YouTube and other outlets, you can personally put your own film on. So, yes, it's more difficult to get conventional distribution with these huge corporations behind you to pay for marketing. The marketing is the issue, not the technology.
Yeah.
And, because how do you get attention in this crowded marketplace with your film? But you can put your film on. And then it's up to the film and marketing. Look, most of the and I don't know, I think a lot of people will agree with this, and it's not controversial saying this. Most of the films that the studios make are absolute crap. They should never have been made.
Right.
But they get them out there. But some are good. But many of them are an actual abomination and shameful. They're so bad. But because they've got the marketing power, they can put them out there, and they look like legitimate movies.
Yeah.
They're really star vehicles that have been put together by the agencies, and So, I think ultimately, to try and answer your question directly, I think ultimately this is going to get down to the quality of the story, the quality of the content. And I don't think you can keep a good story down, even if you don't have marketing, even if you don't have a giant corporation behind you. If your story catches something, you can get it out there. Or if it's like really clever, then if it's very clever. I mean, in the horror genre, for example, really clever was Paranormal, which was the cheapest cameras you can get at your hardware store, made with you. And what's the one, what's it called, the Blair Witch?
Yeah.
That was really clever. And so if you can bypass this whole these corporate roadblocks with ingenuity and intelligence, and there are a lot of great young filmmakers out there who have the ingenuity and intelligence. So that's the way to get past these roadblocks.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that most studio films are crap now, and it seems like TV and live streaming TV shows are getting more respect, and that's a very scary thought. It's even scarier thought that people are saying that all the best writing is on TV and that film is antiquated.
Yeah, look, I'm a big screen guy. I like to see movies on a big screen. Can you tell a great story on an iPhone?
No.
Watch it on an iPhone. You probably can, but it's not good for your eyeballs. I think there's something about sitting in an audience on a big screen. I think there's something about the theatrical experience which is fundamental and probably goes back to the original, entertainments. Dare I say the Colosseum, but theater was the theater experiences with other people, and a comedy is so much better when there's other people laughing around you.
Yeah.
And it's a good example of comedy because you can miss, if you're by yourself, you can miss a lot.
Yeah.
But if you're in an audience, you pick up the vibe from the audience, you pick up specific things, jokes and whatever, but it's a different experience if you've just got to figure out the whole thing by yourself. So end of my speech on that.
Yeah, I've seen, a comedy movie 20 times by myself, and it took me until the 20th time to see every joke that I've missed, the first 20 times.
Well, there you go. I mean, I still watch Buster Keaton. I think Buster Keaton is one of the great directors, by the way.
Oh yeah.
And his films are so precise. My God, the gags. They're just so crisp. Sherlock Holmes Jr., as I just saw it again, is just a brilliant film where the projectionist walks into the screen and starts taking part in the story. I mean, how far out is that? How avant-garde, how imaginative is that? That's fantastic. Again, that's a film where one of the themes of the film is film itself. Specifically, he's a projectionist.
I think Charlie Chaplin was a genius too.
Genius. The Great Dictator, wonderful film. Oh, so many. Gold Rush.
Modern Times.
Shoulder Arms. I mean, these guys, I'm not sure what a genius is, but they, if there is such a thing, they were geniuses. I like Lubitsch's films too. Different era, different values, different style. But I love the Lubitsch To Be or Not to Be.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Speaking of The Great Dictator, Lubitsch's film is fantastic.
Yeah. Do you have any upcoming films you want to plug?
Well, I'm working on three things. I'm working on an animated film called The Hunchback Bee of Notre Dame, which is inspired by the fact that the beehives at the top of Notre Dame survived the recent fire, and a funny film, I think, but about a very serious subject, Nazi art. Leni Riefenstahl, Albert Speer, and it really tackles the issue of can you be an artist in an evil regime? And if you are, is your art evil? So I've been working on that for a while, and we've been filming. It's a hybrid documentary, recreation, you name it. There's all kinds of medium in it. And then I'm working on the story of the only Jewish general in the British Empire, Sir John Monash, who happened to be Australian as well. Mm-hmm. And he was put in charge of the Australian Army in World War I at the very end of the war, and he's credited by the Germans as having ended World War I. He was a brilliant general, and because he was Jewish, he had a lot of people against him from anti-Semitism, and they only put him in charge at the very end. By some miracle, the King of England at the time was not an anti-Semite, which was a miracle because everyone around him was.
Yeah.
Anyway, he organized this battle on the 8th of August, 1918, the Battle of Amiens, with 250,000 troops, one of the biggest battles in history. And again, this is an unsung story because the guy was Jewish. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, he's been whitewashed out of history. But by comparison, Wellington had 60,000 troops at Waterloo to defeat Napoleon. This guy had 250,000. Anyway, he crashed through the German lines, and the war was over shortly after.
Wow. Well, I hope those movies go well, and I'll certainly keep an eye out for them. And I appreciate you coming on today, Philippe. It was such an honor.
Oh, thank you. As I say, I enjoy pontificating.
Yes, you certainly are great at it. Well, you have yourself a great day, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Tommy.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Philippe Mora. Ain't he a cool dude? Yes, he is, and he's also very intelligent and has great knowledge for film. Look at all the cult films he's made. It was a pleasure and an honor to talk to this man. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes!